Nearly a year and a half early, Doug Ford has called a snap election. Why, you ask? Well, he's trying to pull a fast one. He's afraid that the RCMP will soon lay criminal charges due to his government's Greenbelt corruption. That's the scandal that saw friends of the Conservative government and of the Ford family itself receive covert approval to develop their lands on the Greenbelt. As a result of these actions, the value of their lands increased by approximately $8 billion overnight. Ford is also concerned about shifts in voting intention. History shows that Ontarians are less inclined to vote for the Conservatives provincially if there is a Conservative government in Ottawa, trying to avoid keeping all of their eggs in one basket, so to speak. Aware that a federal election is coming soon, and that the Pierre Poilievre Conservatives have a big lead in the polls, Doug Ford has pulled the trigger on an election now to protect his own lead in the polls. Doug Ford is also counting on low voter turnout, and a snap election in the dead of winter will help to bring this about. Low voter turnout tends to favor incumbent governments. It also favors populist political parties like his. This is another way that Doug Ford is tilting the playing field in his favor. Additionally, because the election was called so early, election officials could plan for only 3 advance voting days instead of the usual 10. Again, this will suppress voter turnout and favor Doug Ford and his Conservatives. And by calling an election so early in his mandate, Doug Ford has deprived his political opponents of the time they need to ramp up their own political campaigns and build their own resources to be competitive, again, favoring Doug Ford and his Conservatives. Add to that the fact that the Federal Liberal Party is currently in the midst of a leadership campaign, and critical volunteer and organizational resources are currently being split between those federal Liberal candidates and the provincial Liberal campaign of Bonnie Crombie. Again, this tilts the favor towards Doug Ford and his Conservatives in this current snap election. Doug Ford is claiming that he called this election in order to get a new mandate to deal with Donald Trump's tariffs. What nonsense. He already has a strong mandate, and he has an overwhelming majority in the legislature. In calling a snap election, Doug Ford shut down the normal operations of the provincial government and sent everybody out on the campaign trail. So he shut down government on the eve of the tariff crisis, just when we needed all hands on deck. It is absurd for him to claim that this was in Ontario's best interests, and posing as Captain Canada on American television networks is not real work. Keep in mind that trade policy and tariffs is a federal responsibility. It was the Prime Minister and federal cabinet who was dealing directly with their counterparts in the Trump administration. And it was the Prime Minister himself who talked to Donald Trump and got the reprieve on the tariffs. When the tariff threat became imminent, Doug Ford simply latched onto it as an excuse for him to call his early snap election. This explains why the Ford government was already set to issue those $200 checks to Ontarians, a $3 billion bribe in the pipeline, just ready to go. It also explains why Doug Ford accelerated the timing of beer and wine in convenience stores, and in doing so cost taxpayers more than $600 million to break the contracts. He wanted to move it up and get it done before his snap election call. It explains why the Ford Conservatives have been flooding the airwaves with negative attack ads against Liberal leader Bonnie Crombie so early in the election cycle. It explains why the Ford government spent a record $103.5 million on pro-government advertising in the most recent fiscal year. None of these actions by the Conservatives were coincidental. Obviously, Doug Ford has been setting the stage for an early election call for some time. Now that tariffs are off the table, at least until after the election, Doug Ford is going to look pretty stupid if he continues playing Captain Canada rather than address the real issues of Ontarians in this election campaign. So here's hoping that his unnecessary early election call turns out to be a lot more consequential than he expected. My name is Gerry Hawes, and this is Maverick Musings. Please like, subscribe, and share.